Hey, what's up? I'm Forrest Cole, and I'm the creator of the Fathers For podcast. I just wanted to come on, have a little solo show. We're probably going to do these every once in a while with myself and maybe some of the other dads that are involved in this podcast that can have their own solo shows and talk about issues that are important to them. I wanted to create this podcast because being a dad next to being a husband is the most important thing in my life. And I am constantly striving to be better at both of those things. And I just think that sitting around and talking with other dads who have different opinions and different situations, I think we can learn a lot, and I think just the process of talking about this is incredibly important. And I hope that this brings a lot of value to your lives as fathers as well. A little bit about myself. I am a 50-year-old father of a 6 and a 4-year-old boy. I never planned on being an older dad, but life has ways of doing things that you could never imagine. I married for the first time a month from 40. My wife was only a few years younger than I am at 37, also her first marriage. And, we planned on having kids right away, but, being at the age that we were, it was quite difficult. In fact, it was quite impossible without science. And we ended up having our two boys through IVF treatments in Spain. And it is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. What a blessing it is to be a father. Now, most of my friends are having grandkids right now, and so it's a very different kind of situation to think about. A lot of my friends are empty nesters, or they have one of my really good friends just had their son just had a kid, and it's difficult sometimes to think about the life differences, but I wouldn't have it any other way. What's it like being an older dad? So I live in Utah right now. I haven't always lived here. I'm originally from Southern California, and we moved here about mid-pandemic. And a lot of people have kids young here. A lot of people get married. Sometimes they're teenagers, sometimes they're in their early 20s. And so, if you if you listen to the first episode of the Fathers For podcasts, two of our dads are, one in late 20s, early 30s, and they've got young kids. And then another dad is my age, but he has a 22-year-old and a 18-year-old. I think I get those right. But so it's just a different perspective, and don't get me wrong. Sometimes kids or even adults will be like, ask me if I'm their grandfather, which, it might have a little tinge here, but you know what? It's okay. Like being an older dad of young boys, it keeps me young. Like I'm out there mixing it up with them, playing sports, Hot Wheels, trying to think of all the things they're into right now. It just is amazing and it keeps me young. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm sure I don't have the same energy as I did when I was in my 20s, and that's okay. But I do my very best to like keep up. And maybe when they get a little bit older and I get a little bit older, maybe I'll start to see some more of those significant differences. But right now, I just feel like I'm in my 30s, and so I love it. I absolutely love it. One thing I do worry about when it comes to being an older dad is not being around as long. I worry about, you never know. Like I just spent a week in the hospital. It's a long story, but basically I had an infection and my body went into shock and my organs started to shut down. And luckily I was, sort of recognized that something bad was happening. And so we spent the week in the ICU and everything is getting there. I'm still healing. I'm getting back to normal, but it's like those things that scare me, right? Like what happens is what the worst thing could have happened. And then my sons, would have lost their dad at a very young age. And so I'm doing everything I can to be healthy and to make sure that my body is up to this. being an older dad. And so, I don't drink anymore. I've been sober for a long time, long before I had kids. I'm trying to do the best I can to make sure that I'm here for a super long time and that I get to enjoy my kids' life. I think also another benefit of being an older dad is that I have lived a lifetime. I've lived a lifetime of adventure. I've lived in multiple countries. I've lived in many states. I've seen 49 of the 50 states. I'm hoping to go, since this is my 50th year, I'm hoping to go to my 50th state and go see Alaska. And, both my boys were born in Abu Dhabi. I mentioned this in the first episode of the podcast. And what a great experience. My eldest son, who was 2 when we left Abu Dhabi, he had already traveled to 12 countries by the time he left. Now, he won't remember those, but he still has his passport. And I do believe that the adventure that was important to me and important to my wife has informed him. And he talks all the time about wanting to live in Africa, wanting to live in Australia, just wanting to do like things that we have done. And I think that's really, really important. My youngest son, he was 2 months old when we left Abu Dhabi, and I haven't yet seen that in him, but I know that it will come. I am just incredibly grateful that I was able to have kids. Like we think about, there's a lot of options, right? My mom was adopted. We could have adopted, but just the fact that we could we went to this clinic in Spain, and, we ended up trying, I think in total, we ended up trying 12 times and were successful twice. We tried a bunch of times in Abu Dhabi. We had no luck at all. And then we went to Spain, and we were successful 3 of the 4 times. But unfortunately, the first one ended in a miscarriage, that's another story. But it was incredibly heartbreaking, as you can imagine. So I think also that, the going through that process, going through these IVF treatments, this incredible roller coaster of emotions, hitting points where you think, you're here. I am in my 40s. My wife was in her 40s when our oldest was born, and you reach points where you feel like you're not going to have kids. And what a very difficult thing. You try to balance it with this idea that, we could think of all the freedom we have, think of the money we'd save, think of the places we'd be able to travel and live with no kids. But it's not the same for me. I know that there are plenty of people out there that live life without kids and they're perfectly happy. But for me, being a dad was all I ever wanted. I can remember I was actually living here in Utah back then, and I was sitting on a stoop. I was 23 years old. I'm sitting there talking with some friends, and I was like, you know what? I'm ready to have kids. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have a wife, but I was ready to have kids. I think maybe because my mom and dad were 23 when I was born. Maybe that's just the feeling I was having, but life has a funny way of taking you here and there, and I just kind of followed life as it took me. And then like I said, it's been a wonderful and amazing adventure, but it meant that, we sort of started life a little bit later than most. Funny thing is that my wife and I met, she was 24 and I was 27. We met in a James Joyce class at UNLV, and we dated and we hung out. We never got super serious. And at some point, we just decided to be friends, and then we reconnected so maybe like 5 years later in 2011, after, so that was 10 years of knowing each other, and we just fell in love, and it went from there. And she was moving to Korea to go work, and I was living in New York. I had my own business, running a restaurant and a mobile food business, fish tacos. And I asked her to stay, and she said that she had to go, and I respected that. But then I decided that I was going to go visit her in Asia, and so she was able to she had some time off in the winter, and so we went to Sri Lanka, and then let's see, we met in Sri Lanka. She flew back to Korea. I was there with my best friend as well, and he and I hung out, and then I went to Korea, spent some time there. Then we went to Malaysia and Thailand and Burma and back to Thailand. And we were doing a visa run. And on that trip from Burma back to Thailand on a long tail boat is when I proposed. And it was a great moment. It was good, fun story to tell. And when we got back to Thailand, if you ever experience traveling for a long time, the dates just disappear. And so they stamped our passport when we got back, and it ended up being Valentine's Day of all days, which is a day I never really loved. So today, till this day, for us, it's Burma Day. But I'm sort of kind of going on and on about our story, but I think all of this is important as it pertains to me being a dad. I am not a perfect dad. After many years of living and waiting and having kids at an older age, there's a lot of things that I'm better at than I was when I was young, and a lot of things that have made it so that I can be a present and great dad. However, I'm not perfect, and there's a lot to learn towards being a great dad. And I think everyone has a lot to learn towards being a great dad. Some of us may have grown up in a household where we've sort of learned bad parenting habits. Maybe some of us have a short temper. Maybe some of us aren't totally as present as we could be, but we all have something to learn. For me, personally, I absolutely love my parents, my mom, my stepdad, and my dad, but it wasn't a perfect upbringing. I mean, maybe there isn't a perfect upbringing, and there were some habits that I've had to work on to be better. And this is not a criticism of my parents at all. It's just a recognition that each generation we should get better. I hope that my boys, that they'll get better as well, that they'll see the faults that I have, the things that I've tried to work on, and that they will work on those too. And before, once they become dads, if that happens, they'll be better than I am. And that's what I wish for, that you wish that for your kids in any way, right? That they'll be able to be better at everything that you do. How do you do that? How do you help your kids to become great dads? And how do you help yourself to become a great dad? Well, I think first and foremost, you have to own up to your mistakes. If you make a mistake, you have to go to your kids and apologize. And, sometimes you have to ask them for forgiveness because we make mistakes. I can remember, so like I said, I was in the hospital. I'm still recovering, and when you're sick like that, it's really hard. You feel vulnerable, you feel weak, you feel all of these things, and because of that, you can make mistakes, right? You can be short-tempered, you can yell, you can do the things that you don't want to do and that you regret. So example for me was I think I'd only been out of the hospital like a couple days, and my wife had to go out somewhere, and I was putting the kids to sleep, and I was feeling terrible, like so tired, still feeling sick. And I asked my boys, I was like, look, will you please take it easy on dad tonight? Bedtime is one of those touch points, right? One of those stress areas that I think a lot of moms and dads deal with, right? And I just needed them to listen, you know? And they were like, "Yeah, Dad, of course." But, as they're young kids, they get excited about things, they argue, and I can't even remember what it was about, which is so ridiculous, but they started to fight about something, and I just lost it. I got mad, and I raised my voice, and I immediately was like, "What are you doing? Why are you raising your voice at them?" Like, these little kids, they don't deserve that, right? But I was in a, pretty heavy state of vulnerability, and but I immediately was like, came to them and I hugged them and I kissed them and I was like, "I'm sorry. Your daddy doesn't feel well. He's not thinking clearly." And he just reacted in a way he shouldn't have reacted. Will you forgive me? And those words, that action is going to go a long way. Like how many fathers and sons do we see, like whether it's on TV or in the movies or in real life, that like lose contact with each other? They don't have a relationship. And I think it's because of those reasons that nobody can ask for forgiveness, right? It's hard, whether it's the dad or the son. You can't call him up and be like, "Will you forgive me?" Right? It's incredibly important that we set this standard now, because the last thing that we want to do is to live that cliche of these father and son struggles when you get older. If we can create a system where we can talk to each other, forgive each other, own up to our mistakes, I can only imagine how far that would go once our children grow older. This reminds me a little bit of Bruce Springsteen's album Nebraska and the song My Father's House. It's all about this dream. He wakes up and thinks that he thinks about his father, but when he wakes up, he goes to the house and his father's gone. His father's passed away. He doesn't live there anymore. And what a tragic story that is. And that's the last thing that we want as fathers, right? We don't want to be a burden or separate from our kids or not being able to, talk to each other. And I just think it's incredibly important that we set the standard now. And if whether you have young kids or teenagers or even older kids, we have to make sure that we give ourselves the tools to have a lasting, strong relationship. I love being a father. I love it so much. And I know I have so much more to grow. I'm not sure if I said that sounded right. It didn't sound right in my head. And I love it. I love growing. And I love community. And I think, like with the four gentlemen that I do the podcast with, we've come together and created this small community and we help each other. And that's the hope I have for this podcast and the accompanying YouTube videos, is that we can create a community of fathers, a community of parents, where we can come together and grow and learn and just be better at what we're doing, so that our kids thrive and then they can be better when it's their turn. That's my hope for this podcast and this YouTube channel. It's my hope for all of these things. And I really appreciate you guys joining us on this journey. And if you have any questions or any comments, please leave them. You can DM us on our Instagram account at the Fathers 4, and you can also please follow us there. Please follow us on your podcast platform and ultimately on YouTube as well, just so that we want to be involved. We want to know what's going on. We want to help, and we want to help ourselves as much as we want to help others, and I love it. So I want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.